in University Malaya Medical Center, and it's my pleasure to present here some work we've been doing recently on the quality of life in people living with ALS. And although it is the stated goal of our MND clinics to improve the quality of life, we sometimes struggle to define what is meant by quality of life. Most importantly, what do people living with ALS mean by quality of life, and what do healthcare professionals mean by quality of life? As for the WHO, what it means is an individual's perception in the context of culture and value systems in relation to their goals, expectations, standards, and concerns. So this goes back a long while to the early days of research, where this diagram came up nicely showing that quality of life can be understood as this gap between, on the top, hopes, ambitions, dreams, and on the bottom, the reality in the here and now. So this graphical show here is on a time scale, on a time axis, and highlighting that it is dynamic. The quality of life can fluctuate within a short period over hours and days. And very importantly, in MND, it will be fluctuating over the course of the disease as well. And not only in a simple single dimension as is shown here, but also very importantly in terms of shifting priorities. And what has been shown before is that the functional status, which is normally used to predict quality of life, does not do so very well in motor neuron disease. And that's because the disease itself is progressive, and hence any measure that equates quality of life with functional status would seem to show that quality of life is only ever decreasing. But intuitively, that does not tally with the observation and the stated quality of life of patients living with ALS, who, if when they're asked, will often say that even despite a poor functional status, they do enjoy a reasonable and even very good quality of life sometimes. Beyond that, quality of life is very individual. So what makes impact on quality of life may vary across a broad range. It may be spending time with grandchildren, it may be being able to perform sports, it may be continuing one's professional role, just to name a few. And also very importantly, horizons shift, and we find this very important whenever discussing things such as artificial nutrition, non-invasive ventilations, where initially it is seen as something that cannot be imagined by people living with ALS as potentially an option, but then as horizons shift, as expectations change, they may often find it acceptable in terms of their quality of life. To just mention, there are many instruments available for measuring quality of life. The WHO own quality of life instrument is the HOQOL, that is widely translated and validated, but not disease specific. As opposed to that, the schedule for the evaluation of individual quality of life is unique in that it gives patients a place to identify the individual factors that shape their quality of life. But it is not disease-specific to ALS either. And in addition to that, we have two ALS-specific instruments, the ALS AQ40 and the ALS SQL short form, which we actually adapted for our research. The ALS AQ40, as you can see here, does have a selected range of aspects in considerations that are mostly related to functional status in the physical domain, and also, crucially, it contains emotional functioning. And building a bit further on this, perhaps, the ALS SQL short form instrument has been devised around the insight that physical symptoms are one out of a rather large number of aspects that are important. And we can see here the relatively more emphasis posed on the psychosocial and spiritual domains, negative emotion, intimacy, religiosity. So this is a questionnaire that draws on selection from other previously validated questionnaires. And just to briefly mention, the sequel I alluded to just now is focused around a physical cardboard device where patients label the domains important to their individual quality of life on the various sectors in the circle, and then arrange the sectors of the circle in a sliding manner such that the area exposed reflects the relative contribution of this area of their life to the overall quality of life. So it's allowing them to express the weightage of various aspects, and then they will be giving individualized rating of how well is every of those aspects going for them at the moment. So this has been shown in ALS populations to be preferred often over other instruments, because it does give that role for an individual assignment of what matters in terms of quality of life to patients. So building on this, what we did was to use the methodology of cognitive interviewing, which in a nutshell is putting into use the technique of thinking aloud. So in our clinic, we recruited 21 patients and caregivers and used the ALS SQLSF as a questionnaire and handed it to patients with a request to please fill it up as well as think aloud as they are doing so. For example, if they found a question easy, then just give an answer there. But if, for example, they struggled with anything, then we requested them to please share what is on their mind as they're answering this question. So, for example, if you find something difficult to understand, then you might say, well, I wonder what is meant by this. I think this is meant, and therefore I will answer in such a way. So this is a methodology that has been found useful at the early stages of designing questionnaires previously, and which we chose as a means of investigating how patients interact with questionnaires. And what did we find? First of all, there is this very important issue of the correct understanding of questions. So with cognitive interviewing, we can get an insight into how patients understand questions, how they go about reasoning about their answer, and how they eventually give an answer. So for example, and this is just one example, there's the issue of discomfort versus pain in many questionnaires. And this has been found in our group of patients as well, where sometimes people might say, I don't say I have pain, but I am generally having a lot of discomfort. And this is reflected in the ALS SQLSF in a sense of I'm feeling physically terrible. And a lot of patients can relate to this question well. On the other hand, there are questions pertaining to spirituality that may be challenging and that may at times show a difference between what is the intended aim of a question and what patients actually answer. So for example, in a Malaysian context, there are a number of patients, quite large number, who do not identify as belonging to one of the monotheistic religions, and yet their concept of religion is often limited to monotheistic religion. So they might say that, well, if I'm asked if religion is a source of strength, I couldn't really answer because I don't consider myself religious, and therefore I would just tick this particular answer. But it clearly may not reflect the intended meaning of the questionnaire in that regard. And likewise, people may wonder, and they did in our study, what does it mean having been a religious person? And they may find coming up with an answer challenging in those cases. Then we found some specific sources of distress that affect quality of life and which are not covered in the existing questionnaires, especially in our group of patients, there is a problem with regards to ALS generally not being a widely known disease in the public, and hence patients struggling with recognition of their disease and isolation from being shunned or sometimes being isolated as the general public has a poor understanding of MND, and out of that there's this awkwardness that arises in interacting with the population, with members of the public, and generally the awareness of MND may be poor. That is a source of distress. And likewise, some of our participants mentioned as an important factor the lack of financial support or the lack of support with regards to their job and employment. And also it emerged that patients often found certain questions inappropriate. And for example, the intimacy domain of questions was often felt as inappropriately asking about physical intimacy. So either patients did not quite construe physical intimacy as issues pertaining to sexuality, or else they might have construed it in that way, and they might have felt that it is inappropriate. And some participants mentioned that they did not think it was an item that would belong in such a questionnaire. And that, of course, has been found in previous research as well, where it has been related by patients that filling up questionnaires about quality of life can be both burdensome in terms of the physical effort and also distressing in terms of the emotional or spiritual aspects. So this is where cognitive interviewing can be helpful in, first of all, finding out whether a particular questionnaire really seems to be acceptable to a population. And why did we choose this title of the uncertainty principle? Basically, like in physics, we have to commit to either determining the location or the momentum of an electron, for example. In measuring quality of life, it does seem that we either have to choose between measuring in the quantitative terms what is the quality of life of someone, or really understanding what is someone's quality of life in a qualitative sense. And patients generally, while answering this questionnaire, did often go into quite lengthy reports about what shapes their quality of life, and they do appreciate being able to express in individual terms what matters to them. And that is something which, on the other hand, the quantitative questionnaires do not allow for. And therefore, the take-home message of this is that there are a lot of useful instruments out already, and when measuring quality of life or understanding quality of life at the individual level, it is helpful, depending on the cultural background we are in, to use this technique of cognitive interviewing to get an idea of whether a particular questionnaire might or might not work in the setting that we're in, rather than wholesale adopting one questionnaire for all purposes. And with these references, I conclude and thank you for your attention.
Thanks, David. Oh, there he is. Thanks, David. We've got time for some questions. If anybody has a question, put your hand up. Oh, I've got light shining in my eyes. Any questions online? David, it looks like you've absolutely answered all of our questions, and as an OT, quality of life is my jam. So if there's any other...
Couldn't be. There must be some questions. I have a lot of questions myself. I mean, it raised questions for me, but... yeah.
Oh, we have a question. Sorry. Just walking the microphone down. Gudjon from Iceland.
Thank you for this but it seems like the government measures our quality of life differently than we do, because they seem to have the measurement of surviving, but we want to be alive and living. So it's maybe we should teach the government to change their measurements of our quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's excellent point. And yeah, the reason we were interested in this is that seeing patients doing well quite independently of an ALS-FRS score. We know that it is necessary for research to use ALS-FRS, but I think being in a situation where we only have one multidisciplinary clinic for the whole of the country, we hope that, maybe this could go some way, measuring quality of life, and really making it the focus that we should measure, and that we should somehow target in a way that's appropriate for patients.
I've got one question coming in online.
Yeah, we have a question from Lynn from ALS Problem Solvers. The quality of life questions must be especially if the cognitive decline is involved. And so you touched on it a wee bit, but can you expand more on that?
Yes, among the limitations was that our patients were really in the early stages of disease, and that was because of practical considerations and also not wanting to burden them in the clinic, in the setting of the clinic where they had a lot of appointments. I think that is an excellent point to be considered as well, and that I have omitted, and it will probably count as an argument for the individualized quality of life, exploring along those ideas of the sequel, what matters to the patient. And I think that should very well be a focus, even if there is a component of cognitive impairment.
I think that's all the questions. Thank you so much. That was, and I think, as an OT, I look at quality of life in a very, functional way across whatever sort of timeline someone is in, or whatever sort of, place they are. So I think it's something that we all need to look at. Thank you so much, David.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Have a nice day.
Thank you so much.
Look forward to seeing you. Bye-bye.